Welcome back to the E46 S85 build. As you can see, you got the actuators that work. They're doing their thing. So that issue is solved. It turned out to be some burnt transistors in the actuators themselves. In the previous video, we showed you that circuit board. You know, it kind of looked like the bird's eye view of Scarborough, but it was a circuit board. And some of the components on there were a little bit not functioning. But nonetheless, those things are working now. From the last video till now, we did run into a whole bunch of different issues with solutions to match. We had a little bit of time to just go over some of those things, and I kind of want to just like mention those things now. With the caliber of build that this is, the swap is definitely not simple, and anyone at home that's attempting any type of engine swap or a relatively large build where a lot of components have to be modified or reviewed, you're going to run into some potential issues. With this engine, we did our best. We went through it. We changed all the wear components. We visually checked stuff that is a wear component, and it was changed if it needed to be. Like, for example, all new vanos, solenoids, the lines, hoses, all those things that we could visually see, they were all gone through. But you're going to run into issues towards the end of the build where certain electronic components might be acting up, things that you can't really visually see or test even until you get to a point where it's time to do so by actually starting the car up and seeing the functionality of everything. We had the actuator issue, which is now solved. But even after the actuator, we got new actuators, which, by the way, took about 3 to 4 weeks. What? Because some of these components are not readily available and they require them to be shipped from Germany. Even after that, we had a TPS issue on one of the banks, which we had to go through, make sure all that stuff was calibrated and actually diagnose that and replace it, and then it worked. Another issue was while we were trying to get it up running and everything, we had a big misfire on 2 cylinders. Working with like a aftermarket ECU, you don't always have the luxury of just pulling a code like how you would on a E60 M5 where this engine came from. For example, if there was a misfire on that, it would throw a code. You scan your car, and kind of gives you an idea of what to look for. Here, we had to pull the plugs, make sure all the plugs were burning equally, and which ones that didn't. We got to kind of pedal backwards from there to diagnose the issue properly. So stuff like that, it adds complexity, it adds time to the build, it adds a little bit more with builds like this. It's not as straight through or simple as it might sound. You're gonna hit roadblocks, hurdles, and you just gotta kind of just tackle them one at a time.
Oh my God!
We had a leak in one of our rad couplers. As you can see, the hoses are tight, so we needed to kind of divert the hose away from the pulleys and kind of also not rubbing up against the frame. So we made this piece. This basically just goes onto the plastic rad couplers that BMWs are notorious for, and we kind of just added this piece to change up the angle a little bit. Our initial design was the same, but the material and the process of that 3D print was not up to spec for what is required to run coolant through it. The pressures, it was leaking actually through the component itself. So we had a company called Design Fusion. They're actually a Toronto-based company, and they made us this piece, which is, I believe it's a resin print, so it's more sealed. It is also, they polished it in a way, is good for coolant and will withstand like the operating pressures and temperatures that that system will see. So that certain misfire condition was actually caused by 2 injectors that were not firing at all. Luckily, we have a local injector service place called Toronto Injectors. They did a great job at servicing all 10 injectors for a fairly good price. Their service was phenomenal. I want to give a shout out to them, Toronto Injectors. You can find them on Google. They have great reviews, and the guy really, he takes his time. They all work flawlessly. They were like all the cylinders were burning equally. The misfire was gone, and we moved to the next part of the process. These E46 M3s on the US models only come with what is called an EKP module. So basically, the fuel pump is controlled by a PWM type module, which the ECU sends a PWM signal, which then the module converts into how much voltage the pump actually sees. A different load that the engine sees, the fuel pressure doesn't have to be the same. So when it's idling, it's a little bit lower. When it's like, you're giving her, the pressure increases. So that's what that's responsible for. Although it did work, but having it kind of the pump at max all the time instead of the ECU sending it a precise signal, it burned out. And then after a little bit of digging, the stock pump at max will draw about 12 amps. Our AEM 340 LPH pump at max draws 15 amps. So that's a little bit more. Over time, it will burn out. So we switched it over for a regular relay, especially 40 amps, something like this, with a weather sealed socket. And that actually is located in the trunk of this vehicle. And now we know that even at the pump running max continuously, we're not going to overwhelm that wiring of that circuit. So that's all good to go. Right now, as you could tell with how the car was idling, it's a little bit haunting. It's not a stable, smooth idle. And that's kind of something we're figuring out right now. It seems to be that the idle air control valves are throwing a fault. So what happens with this ECU on startup, because both the throttle actuators and the idle air control valves are communicating through the CAN bus, they have their own startup procedures. So if they're both going to go through their ranges, make sure everything is happy. And if it isn't, it's going to throw it into kind of a limp mode of its own, where, for example, here, the idle air control valve, one or both of them might have not passed that test, and it's giving priority to the throttle actuators, which those things are trying to compensate and hold the idle, which is, it can't do the best job holding the idle. That's why those idle air control valves are there, for fine-tuning those air adjustments. These engines were pretty rare even when they came out back in the mid-2000s in the E60 M5, and they're only getting more scarce. So finding some of these components is a little bit of a process on its own. And when you do swaps like that, you're most likely going to be working with older used engines. These particular engine, it has a lot of items that fail. Unfortunately, they have a lot of items that have certain service intervals, and you need to really upkeep it to have like a flawless working setup. Like I said before, we're going through it all, ensuring that the engine is working tip-top, and that's just part of the process. Yeah, so that kind of ends off this video. We've come a long way so far, and it started up, it's running. We just got a couple of things to iron out here, and yeah, then it'll be ready to go for its first drive. Anyways, we'll catch you guys later. If you guys have any questions, please hit up the comment section. We're happy to answer any of them, and yeah, we'll see you next time.